You are already slowing down, even as you read these words or let them arrive through the soft quiet of your headphones. Something in you is already beginning to release. Your shoulders have dropped a little. Your jaw has softened. The thoughts that were circling just a few minutes ago are losing their edges, their urgency, their need to be resolved tonight. There is nothing you need to do right now. There is nowhere you are supposed to be. Whatever was left undone today, it will be there when morning comes, and morning is a long way off. So let yourself settle a little further into wherever you are lying. Feel the weight of your body, the particular heaviness of your legs, the places where your back meets the surface beneath you, the soft pressure of whatever is covering you. Let your hands rest open or loosely closed, however they want to be. Let your face be still. You are going to travel somewhere tonight, not quickly. There's no speed involved at all. You are going to drift slowly through an open warmth, rising gently, the way a leaf rises on a current of warm air, without effort, without direction, simply carried. There's a place waiting for you. It is already warm. It already smells of cedar and something faintly mineral, faintly sweet. There are soft sounds there, a low, steady hum, the whisper of paper in a slow draft, the distant hiss of something rising far below. You do not need to imagine it sharply. You do not need to picture it in detail. Simply let yourself begin to move toward it, slowly, easily, the way sleep itself arrives. Not seized, only received. Close your eyes, if they are not already closed, and let yourself drift. The first thing you become aware of is warmth. Not the sharp warmth of fire, not the pressing warmth of a summer afternoon, but something slower and more patient than either of those. It rises from below, through the soles of your feet, through the wide planks of cedar underfoot, and it moves up through you the way warmth moves through a stone that has been sitting in gentle sun all day, gradually, thoroughly, with no sense of hurry at all. You are standing at the threshold of a doorway. The door behind you has already swung closed on its slow brass hinge, and ahead of you is the mill, the drifting thermal paper mill, though no one here uses its full name. Here, it is simply the mill, or simply here, or simply the place where the sheets are made. It has been aloft for so long that the name matters less than the sound of it, the feel of its floorboards under your feet, the particular quality of its light. The light is amber. It comes from the furnace panels set into the inner walls, low, rectangular openings behind thick slats of perforated iron, where compressed reed ash burns in long, slow cylinders, releasing heat in a steady, even exhale. The amber glow catches the edges of things, the brass fittings on the bobbin frames, the rounded lips of clay pots on the furnace shelf, the hanging white sheets in the loft ahead. It does not illuminate so much as it warms. Everything within the amber reaches seems softer. Everything beyond it is gentle shadow. You take your first full breath of the mill's air. It is dry and warm, with layers to it. Cedar from the floor and the walls, and the great curved ribs of the ceiling, which are made of old planks that have absorbed years of the mill's particular atmosphere. Beneath the cedar is something mineral, something of pressed water and fine stone. The faint ghost of the sea far below, distilled through the thermal columns that rise beneath you even now and hold this entire structure aloft. And beneath that, the reed ash smell, steady and low, not unpleasant. Something between smoke and earth. Something ancient and patient. You breathe it in, and it settles you. The sound of the mill is a hum. A single, continuous, resonant hum. Low enough to feel in your chest if you stand still and let it arrive. The draw fans turning in their shafts, pulling warm air through the mill's galleries in a slow circulation, keeping the moisture moving, keeping the drying sheets from going stiff before their time. It is not a mechanical sound, exactly. It is too organic for that, too alive. It is more like the sound of breathing. A long, steady, enormous breath that the mill itself is taking over and over, never quickening, never faltering. You stand in it for a moment, simply listening. Somewhere ahead of you, the great drying wheel makes a sound, a low, unhurried creak, like a very old tree settling in a very soft wind. The wheel turns once every 4 hours, bearing its cargo of pressed sheets in a wide, slow arc through the warm air of the drying loft. You cannot see it from here, but you can feel the slight, slow rhythm of it, one deliberate degree at a time, patient as a season. There's a figure moving at the far end of the gallery. This is Sarah. She is the night shift spinwright, the one person responsible for the mill between the last light of evening and the first pale suggestion of dawn. She has done this for a long time. You can tell by the way she moves, not hurried, not slow, but exactly as fast as the mill itself requires, which is to say, gently, with great attention, with no wasted motion. She wears a long apron of undyed linen, and her hair is pulled back from her face. And her hands, when they move to check a bobbin housing or straighten a hanging rod, have the particular sureness of someone who has done this same thing thousands of times and found each time that it is still worth doing. She does not speak. There's no need for speech here. The mill speaks in its own language. The hum of the draw fans, the slow creak of the wheel, the papery whisper of the hanging sheets. You understand, simply by being here, that the night belongs to this language, and that your presence here is welcome, and that all you need to do is follow. Sarah turns and begins to walk toward the first row of bobbin frames, and you follow slowly through the amber warmth. The cedar gallery runs the full length of the mill's interior, perhaps 40 paces from threshold to far wall, though distance feels different here than it does in other places, because nothing here encourages you to move quickly. The floorboards are wide and smooth, worn to a particular softness by years of the same slow footsteps, and the warmth comes up through them with every step, not uncomfortably hot, but steady, the kind of warmth that makes you feel held rather than pressed. The bobbin frames stand in 2 rows along the gallery's inner wall, 12 frames to each row, each one a tall cedar structure with brass fittings at every joint, holding 4 bobbins of cloud fiber at varying heights. The cloud fiber itself is pale, almost white, but not quite, with a faint pearlescent quality that catches the amber furnace light and returns it as something softer, something between silver and warm. When you look at it closely, you can see that it is not quite like ordinary thread. It is finer, and it has a slight translucence, as though the clouds from which it was drawn have not entirely forgotten what they were. Sarah moves to the first frame and reaches up to the topmost bobbin with both hands. Her fingers settle on the brass housing, smooth and worn, rounded by many handlings, warm from the ambient air of the gallery. She turns it slightly, testing the tension. You can hear the tiny sound this makes, a soft, low tick, like a very quiet clock measuring a very long interval. She tilts her head, listens, then turns it a fraction more. Another tick. She nods, just barely, to herself, and moves on. You follow her down the row, watching. At each frame, she pauses, reaches up, tests the tension of the bobbins, top, middle, lower, her hands moving in the same careful sequence each time. The brass warm under her fingers. The faint tick of the housing, the only sound beyond the mill's steady hum. There's something deeply calming about watching someone do something with this quality of attention. Someone who is not rushing, not performing, simply doing. The warmth rises steadily through the cedar floorboards. At the 5th frame, Sarah finds something she wants to attend to. A lower bobbin, whose housing has developed a slight stiffness. She reaches into the pocket of her apron and withdraws a small glass bottle. Oil, pale and faintly golden. She unstoppers it with her thumb, tips a single drop onto the housing, and works it in with her fingertip in slow, small circles. The brass warming further, the stiffness gradually easing, the bobbin releasing into its smooth turn. She checks it again with her hand. This time the turn is easy and even. She restoppers the bottle, returns it to her pocket, and moves on. The hum of the draw fans is constant beneath everything. It is so steady that it begins, after a while, to feel less like a sound and more like a condition. The way the air itself sounds in a place that is very quiet. The way silence has its own low register. You breathe with it. At the end of the 1st row, Sarah turns and pauses for a moment, looking back along the frames. The amber light catches the pale cloud fiber on each bobbin, making a soft, repeated glow down the row. 12 frames, each one holding its quiet cargo. Everything is in order. She takes a slow breath, and you can see her shoulders settle very slightly downward, the way a person settles when something is as it should be. Then she turns toward the 2nd row, and you follow. This row is slightly closer to the inner furnace wall, and the warmth is a little more present here, not overwhelming, but fuller, the way warmth feels when you step from the edge of a warm room to its center. The amber light is brighter too, catching the brass fittings more directly, and the cloud fiber on these bobbins has a slightly different quality. The sheets drawn from this row are the older fiber, drawn on windless days when the clouds above the sea moved very slowly, and you can see the difference in the slight density of the spun thread, the way it holds more light. Sarah works through this row with the same measured attention. Top, middle, lower, the soft tick of each housing, the occasional pause, the occasional small adjustment. At one frame, she finds a drying rod that has slipped from its notch. A thin brass rod that rests across 2 brackets above the frame, intended to hold the drawn fiber in its proper path. She lifts it gently with both hands and resettles it, listening for the small sound it makes as it finds its notch. A soft, low click, not the tick of a bobbin, but something rounder, more final, like a key finding a lock. She holds it there for a moment, just to be sure. Then she releases it and moves on. You are very warm. Not hot, simply warm. The way you are warm when you have been inside somewhere comfortable for a while, when your muscles have released their holding, when your body has decided that nothing is required of it. The cedar smell is all around you. The hum is all around you. time Sarah reaches the last frame in the second row, you have stopped counting steps, stopped tracking details. You are simply here, in the amber warmth, in the hum, in the slow, patient world of the mill. Sarah finishes with the bobbins and turns toward the far end of the gallery. Ahead, through a wide cedar arch, the drying loft opens. The drying loft is larger than the gallery, or rather, it feels larger, because its ceiling rises and its walls lean outward very slightly, following the gentle swell of the mill's outer hull. The air here is in even more visible motion, slow, circling, carried by the draw fans through vents set high in the wall and low along the baseboard. So the air moves in a great lazy loop, top to bottom, outer wall to inner, around and around without urgency. This is where the sheets hang. They are pressed before they come here. The cloud fiber drawn and set. The pressed mist worked into it through the rollers on the lower level. The whole thing flattened into something that is only barely paper yet. More like a dream of paper. A suggestion of it, still holding too much of its original translucence and weight to be called finished. They are hung on thin wooden rods that slip through their top edges, and each rod rests at either end on a notched brass bracket, and the brackets are set at measured intervals along long parallel lines that run the full width of the loft. There are perhaps 300 sheets hanging here tonight, in the amber furnace light, which enters the loft through panels set into the inner wall at floor level, so the light rises rather than falls. The hanging sheets glow, not brightly, softly. Each one is a slightly different quality of white, depending on where it is in the drying process. The newest ones nearest the far end have a faint blue-gray at their center, where the pressed mist has not yet fully released, and the older ones nearest the inner arch are almost purely white, with a faint texture when you look at them closely. The ghost of cloud fiber, the memory of moisture, pressed into something that will hold a mark, that will carry a thought, that will outlast the day it was made by a very long time. The sheets move in the slow, circling air. Not much, just barely. A slight forward lean, a slight settling back. The sound this makes is almost nothing. A papery whisper, like the turning of a page in a quiet room, repeated very softly, over and over, as the whole 300 breathe together in the draw fan's long circulation. You stand at the arch and let this arrive. The warmth, the amber glow, the pale rose of hanging paper, the barely there papery whisper all around you, the great slow hum beneath everything. Sarah walks into the loft without pausing. She moves down the first row of hanging sheets, her hands raised slightly to her sides as she goes, and every few steps she reaches up and touches the corner of a sheet, very lightly, with just 2 fingers, to feel whether it has reached the right stage of drying. The feel of a sheet that is ready is different from the feel of one that is not. When it is ready, there's a particular stiffness to it, a particular coolness, a particular response under the fingertip, a slight resistance, like a thought that has been decided. When it is not ready, it yields differently, slightly softer, slightly more present, still thinking about what it wants to become. She moves through the row, touching, considering, moving on. At a point roughly in the middle of the row, she finds a sheet whose drying rod has listed very slightly, a fraction of a degree off level, barely perceptible, except to someone who has done this a very long time. She takes the rod between her fingers and lifts it off its brackets, rotates it slightly, and resettles it. The sheet hangs more squarely now. She steps back and looks at it for a moment, head tilted, then nods to herself. Satisfied, she continues down the row. The great drying wheel is visible from here, a slow, enormous curve of cedar and brass set into the right-hand wall of the loft, turning so slowly that if you watch only a short section of its arc, you cannot see it move at all. It is only by looking away and looking back that the motion is apparent. A segment of the wheel that was in one position is now, imperceptibly, in another. The sheets attached to it are the most recently pressed, still the most translucent, still the most blue-gray at their centers, and they turn in their long arc through the warmest part of the loft's circulation, which is where the draw fan output is strongest. The wheel makes its sound, that low, unhurried creak, once every few minutes, when a particular bearing in its axle completes a certain arc. It is not a sound that requires attention. It is simply there, like the hum, like the papery whisper, like the warmth through the cedar floor, part of the loft's long, slow breathing. After a while, Sarah reaches the far end of the row and turns to begin the second. The amber light is slightly different here, a little dimmer, a little more golden, because the furnace panel nearest this end is an older one, its iron slats worn to a slightly different aperture, so the light that comes through it is fuller and warmer than the others. In this fuller warmth, the hanging sheets seem almost to emit a light of their own, a soft, white, barely there radiance, the faint remnant of the clouds from which their fiber was drawn, still half alive in the pressed material. You watch Sarah move through the second row. Her touch on each sheet is the same. 2 fingers, a moment of attention, a response to what she finds. Most of the sheets in this row are farther along than the first. Many of them have reached their stiffness, their coolness, their readiness. She will not take them down tonight. That is morning work, when the day shift comes up from the crew quarters below. But she notes them in the way someone notes something they have been attending to for a long time and are glad to find in good order. The papery whisper of the hanging sheets is very soft. The hum of the draw fans is steady and low, a single long note that continues without breath beneath everything else. The warmth rises through the cedar floorboards, patient and full. You are very comfortable here. You are very still. Sarah finishes the second row and pauses at the loft's inner wall, near one of the furnace panels. She holds one hand out toward it, not to touch it, just to receive its warmth from a short distance, and lets it arrive in her palm for a moment. Then she withdraws her hand and turns toward the near stairwell that leads down to the furnace level. She looks back at the hanging sheets, all 300 of them, pale and quiet in the amber light, barely moving in the draw fan's slow circulation. She looks at them the way you look at something you are responsible for, something you care about, something that is, in this moment, perfectly all right. Then she turns and descends. You follow her down. The stairwell is narrow and warm, warmer than the loft above, because it connects directly to the furnace level, and the heat rises up through it in a slow column that makes the air in the stairwell feel denser, more present, more tangible than the air elsewhere in the mill. The cedar here is older, darker. The walls of the stairwell have been absorbing the furnace heat for a very long time, and the wood has gone from pale gold to something more like dark honey, with a sheen to it that the amber light catches as you descend. The reed ash smell is stronger here. It is not unpleasant. It is deep and low and ancient feeling. The smell of something that has been burning slowly and patiently for a very long time, consuming itself with no hurry, releasing its warmth in a steady, uncomplaining exhale. There's something mineral in it. The compressed stone ash of the fuel, which is made from reed collected far below along the shoreline of the inland sea, dried and pressed and formed into long cylinders that burn for hours without requiring attention. The furnace level is a low-ceilinged room running the full width of the mill, lit entirely by the amber glow of the furnace panels. There are 6 furnaces in all, 3 to each side, each one a long iron box set into the wall at waist height, accessed by a hinged iron door through which the feed cylinders of reed ash are inserted. The doors are closed now, and the furnaces are burning in their patient, even way, their amber light seeping through the iron slats in that particular quality of warm, soft illumination that makes everything within reach seem softer, calmer, more settled. Sarah moves to the first furnace on the right. She opens a small panel beside it, not the feed door, but a smaller one, set lower, which is the inspection window, and looks through at the burning interior. The light from within is a brighter amber, almost orange, and it catches her face as she leans in. Warm light on warm skin, her expression simply attentive, the same quality of attention she brought to the bobbin frames and the hanging sheets. She observes what the burn state is. She closes the panel. She then opens the low cupboard set into the wall beneath the furnace, cedar-lined, slightly warm even inside, and withdraws 2 of the feed cylinders of compressed reed ash. They are smooth and dense and slightly heavier than they look, a warm, earthy thing in the hands, smelling of their own slow future combustion. She opens the feed door with her other hand, the latch clicking softly, the hinges swinging smooth, and feeds the first cylinder in, then the second, watching them settle into place before closing the door again. The furnace accepts them without comment. The hum of the draw fan above shifts almost imperceptibly, a very slight deepening of its tone as the fresh fuel begins to take, and the heat increases by a fraction. Then it settles back to its usual register. Steady, patient, on and on. Sarah moves to the second furnace. She repeats the same sequence. Inspection window, observation, small adjustment of her mental accounting of the fuel state, fresh cylinders from the cupboard below, the soft feed door latch, the cylinders fed in, the door closed, then the third, the fourth. Each one is slightly different. The furnaces have different ages, different characters, different rates of burning, but each one is attended to with the same unhurried care, the same complete attention. There's a shelf above the third furnace, a wide cedar ledge that runs the full length of the wall at shoulder height. On this shelf, among various tools and small implements and folded squares of cloth, there's a clay pot. Round, low, dark. The clay is an old reddish brown, the surface smooth with many handlings, the lid sitting slightly ajar to let the steam breathe. The pot has been on this shelf above the furnace for hours already, kept warm by the steady ambient heat of the furnace wall. And from beneath the lid comes the lightest possible suggestion of something floral and dry and faintly sweet, something that mingles with the reed ash smell and the cedar smell in a way that is entirely its own. Dried blossom tea. Sarah finishes with the 5th furnace and moves to the 6th, completing her sequence. When the 6th furnace is tended and its door closed and the warmth adjusted to her satisfaction, she straightens and turns and looks along the row of furnaces, all 6 glowing in their amber way, all 6 breathing out their patient heat into the mill's long circulation. The draw fans carry it upward. The sheets absorb it. The cloud fiber finishes its slow becoming. She moves to the shelf. She takes the clay pot in both hands. She does not pour immediately. She simply holds it for a moment, feeling its warmth, which is exactly the warmth of the shelf, which is exactly the warmth of the furnace wall, which is the warmth of everything here. The clay is smooth under her palms. She can feel the slight weight of the liquid within, and the slight, fragrant heat of the steam finding its way past the lid and rising against her forearms. There's a clay cup on the shelf beside where the pot stood, low and wide, the same reddish-brown clay, also smooth with long use. She sets the pot down for a moment and takes the cup, and then she lifts the pot again and pours slowly. The tea coming out dark amber, almost exactly the color of the furnace light, settling into the cup with a quiet, low sound. A low, gentle pouring sound that seems completely at home in this room of low sounds and steady warmth. She fills the cup most of the way. She sets the pot back on its shelf above the furnace. She takes the cup in both hands and holds it, and the warmth of it moves into her hands, and from her hands, up through her arms, and she stands there for a moment in the furnace level, in the amber glow, in the reed ash smell, and the cedar smell, and the dried blossom smell, in the hum of the draw fans, and the faint, slow creak of the great wheel overhead, and she is very still. And you stand near her, and you are very still too. The warmth rises through the floor. The amber glow is soft on everything. After a while, Sarah moves toward the stairwell at the far end of the furnace level. Not the one you came down, but a different one, set into the mill's eastern hull. This stairwell is open at the top. It leads not to a closed interior level, but directly to the eastern observation loft, which is the outermost structure of the mill, a gallery that extends slightly beyond the hull proper, its seaward side entirely open to the night sky and the warm air rising from below. As you ascend toward it, you begin to feel the change. The warmth here is the same furnace warmth you have been surrounded by all evening, but it mingles gradually with something fresher as you rise. Cooler, but not cold, simply thinner, the way high-altitude air is always slightly thinner, slightly more present in the throat, slightly more alive in the lungs, and with it comes a trace of something else, faint, barely detectable, a ghost of salt and distance, the breath of the inland sea carried up through the thermal columns from the water far below. You breathe it, and something in you opens slightly. The stairwell tops out onto a landing, and from the landing, a short passage leads to the eastern loft. And then you are there, and the night sky is directly ahead of you. The eastern loft is a platform of cedar planks extending perhaps 10 paces beyond the mill's outer wall, surrounded by a waist-high railing of old brass and worn wood. There is a long bench set against the inner wall, broad and low, covered with a folded length of dense woven cloth in a deep, faded blue. There is a small iron stand at the near end of the bench, the kind of stand made to hold a cup, and and Sarah sets her tea on it as she sits, and the cup rests there, glowing amber in the faint reflected light from the interior panels visible through the loft's inner window. And beyond the railing, the sky and the sea and the night. The sky here is dark and immense. At this altitude, with no other light source for a very great distance, the stars are many, too many to count, arranged in their ancient patterns above and around the mill, in a way that makes the mill seem small, and the night seem very large, and the quality of the silence up here, something entirely unlike the humming warmth within. Outside, the only sound is the wind, but it is not an aggressive wind, not a cold or urgent wind. It is the slow thermal wind, rising from below, barely more than a gentle breath against your face, bringing with it that faint salt trace, that distant reminder of water, far below, very far, so far that the distance itself seems like another kind of warmth, or depth, or patience. The inland sea is a dark presence, silver-edged where the starlight finds it, immense and quiet, and entirely at rest. And from the sea, at intervals that are too irregular to be called a pattern, but too consistent to be called random, the thermal columns rise. You can see them in the starlight if you look carefully. Slow silver columns of warm, mist-laden air, rising from the surface of the water in wide, unhurried spirals, ascending through hundreds of feet of dark sky before dissipating into the general warmth of the altitude. They are the reason the mill floats. They are the reason the mill exists at all. Because without them, there would be no cloud fiber to spin, no pressed mist to work into the sheets, no warmth to circulate through the draw fans and the lofts and the furnace level. The mill is sustained by this patient rising of warm air from distant water, and it floats in that sustenance the way a leaf floats on a current, not because it is fighting anything, but because it has given itself entirely to the thing that carries it. Sarah takes her tea in both hands. She looks out at the thermal columns rising below. She is not watching for anything in particular. She is not waiting for anything to happen. She is simply looking, the way you look at something that is always there and always new, the way you look at something that has no message for you except the message of its own continuing existence, which is, it turns out, enough. The salt trace in the air is very faint. You have to be still to notice it. When you are still, it arrives, a ghost of brine and distance, and the particular mineral quality of water that has been the same water for a very long time, evaporating and condensing and rising and falling in its long, patient cycle. The mill sways, very slightly, so slightly that you would miss it if you were not paying attention. But it is there, a gentle, slow rocking, a tiny adjustment of position as the thermal current beneath shifts its center by a fraction, and the mill responds. It is like being held by something enormous and unhurried. It is like being rocked very slowly in something much larger than yourself. The draw fan's hum is audible even out here, muffled by the hull, reduced to a low, soft vibration in the planks of the observation loft, something you feel more than hear. Sarah takes a slow sip of her tea. The dried blossom steam had cooled on the walk up from the furnace level, and now the tea is at that perfect temperature, warm enough to feel in the chest, cool enough to drink slowly without caution. She holds the cup between both hands after each sip, letting the clay warmth continue to arrive in her palms. and she looks out at the rising thermals in the dark below. You sit beside her on the broad cedar bench in the woven blue cloth. The high-altitude air is very clean, very quiet, thin enough to remind you that this is a long way above the ordinary world, that the ordinary world, with its urgencies and its unfinished things, is very far below, not abandoned, only set aside, held in trust by morning, available when morning comes, and not before. The stars do not move, or rather, they move so slowly that the movement is invisible. Only the accumulation of hours would reveal it. And hours is a different kind of time than the time available here. Here, only the thermal columns move, and only in their patient rising, and the mill sways in their slow breath, and the great drying wheel turns its one unhurried degree inside the warm interior, and the draw fans hum and hum and hum. You are very warm. You are very still. After some time is loose here, always. Sarah finishes her tea and sets the empty cup back on the iron stand. She looks at it for a moment, the clay warmth still holding in the cup's walls, the dried blossom residue at the bottom, a faint, darker shadow. Then she rises and returns to the passage and descends again to the interior, and you follow, back into the amber warmth and the hum and the familiar cedar smell. There are a few things remaining on Sarah's rounds. The mill requires not much of her at this hour. The furnaces are tended, the bobbins are checked, the sheets are drying in their long, unhurried arcs. But there are small things, quiet things, the particular small attentions that a night shift spinwright gives to a mill that is otherwise caring for itself. She walks back through the cedar gallery, slower now than before, not because there's less to do, but because the evening is further along and the mill has settled into its deepest quiet. And to walk any faster would be to introduce something discordant into what has become, by this hour, almost purely rhythm. She pauses at the gallery's midpoint, where there is a wide recessed shelf built into the outer wall, a concave cedar niche at roughly sitting height. On this shelf, there's a collection of small tools, a pair of long-handled gauges for measuring the draw fan tension from a distance, several glass bottles of lubricating oil in different viscosities, a folded sheaf of small cedar shims for adjusting the bobbin frame level, and a worn cloth for wiping the brass. Sarah takes the cloth and moves back down the second row of bobbin frames, wiping each brass housing with a slow, circular motion, not because they are dirty, but because this is part of the evening's care, because brass that is regularly wiped stays bright and smooth under the hand, because the familiarity of the motion is itself a thing worth preserving. The sound of the cloth on brass is very soft, a quiet, slightly whispering friction, rhythmic and slow. Frame by frame, housing by housing, Sarah works her way down the row. The amber light catches the brass she has just wiped, brighter for a moment, then settling back to its usual warm gold. Each frame is slightly different under the cloth. Some housings are slightly cooler to the touch at this hour, having been in shadow since the furnace panel's light shifted. Others are warmer, closer to the draw fan output. She notes each one without naming them. She knows them all by feel. The hum is very present in this part of the gallery. The draw fan shafts run through the inner wall here, and the vibration of them comes through the wall into the bobbin frame structures, a faint, steady shiver that is transmitted into the brass under Sarah's cloth, and very faintly into her hands as she works. It is not unpleasant. It is like holding something that is quietly alive. She finishes the second row and folds the cloth and returns it to the shelf. She picks up one of the cedar shims and carries it back down the row, checking the level of each frame as she goes, looking along the top edge of each structure the way a carpenter checks the horizon line of a piece of work. Most are level. At the 8th frame, she finds the very slight forward tilt she was looking for, barely noticeable, less than a degree, and she crouches down and slides the shim under the front foot of the frame with a smooth, practiced motion, and stands and checks the level again. Better. She presses on the frame gently with the flat of her hand, a small test of stability, and it holds. The cloud fiber bobbins turn smoothly in their newly leveled housing. She nods to herself again, in that same small, private way. The great drying wheel makes its creak, that low, deliberate sound, one arc completed, the next begun. Sarah pauses and looks toward the loft. From here, through the arch, she can see a section of the hanging sheets, the nearest rows, catching the amber light in their pale, barely glowing way. They are still now, or nearly still. The slow circulation of the draw fan air too gentle at this distance to move them visibly. They simply hang in their white rows, patient and quiet, further along in their drying than before, closer to being the thing they are becoming. She watches them for a moment. Then she turns and walks to the far end of the gallery, to the end wall, where there's a low cedar table set against the hull. On this table is a large ledger, old, leather-covered, its edges worn soft, and a short brass stylus. Every evening, Sarah makes a single entry in this ledger: the state of the furnaces, the number of sheets drying, the condition of the bobbins, the quality of the thermal current as judged by the mill's motion throughout the shift. Not a long entry, 10 or 12 lines at most, in handwriting that is regular and unhurried, without flourish. She opens the ledger. She finds tonight's page, already begun in the earlier part of the shift, with the initial assessment written before she began her rounds. Now she adds the second entry: the furnaces tended, the bobbins in order, one frame shimmed at position 8, the thermal current steady, the sheets progressing well. She writes slowly, in the amber glow, the stylus moving across the page with a faint, whispering friction, not unlike the cloth on brass. She finishes. She reads back over what she has written, not checking for errors, simply completing the act, allowing the words to land in the same quiet way the evening itself has landed. Then she closes the ledger. She rests her hand on its cover for a moment. The leather is warm from the ambient air of the gallery. The pages inside hold the record of many evenings. This same gallery, these same sheets, this same warmth and hum, noted and set down, and turned to the next page. The mill's history, in very small increments, each one unremarkable, each one complete. She lifts her hand and turns back toward the loft. The loft is quieter now than it was before. Or perhaps it is only that you are quieter, that the evening has been long enough and warm enough and steady enough that your own internal sounds have settled toward the mill's register, and what seemed like an extraordinary quiet when you first arrived now feels like the natural order of things. The hanging sheets are very still. The draw fan circulation has not changed. It is always the same, but at this point in the night, In the second half of the loft's temperature curve, the air exchange is at its smoothest, its most even, and the sheets respond by simply hanging, simply being, their surfaces continuing to give up their moisture in the most gradual and undisturbed way. Sarah walks down the rows again, not to check anything in particular, not because she has forgotten what she found before, but because this is the walk she takes at the end of her active rounds, the walk that is not work so much as it is accompaniment. She accompanies the sheets through this hour of their drying. She is here with them. The amber light is softer now. The furnace panels always dim very slightly at this hour of the night, when the fresh fuel from the last feeding has caught fully, and the burn has settled into its most efficient register, producing the same heat with slightly less combustion. The flame below the iron slats burning blue gold rather than orange. The sheets in this softer light seem almost to have absorbed it and made it their own. They glow very faintly, very warmly, the white of them taking on a barely there gold at their edges. You walk through the rows beside Sarah. The papery whisper of the sheets is very faint, barely there at all in this settled hour. Only the occasional barely there movement of a sheet breathing in the draw fan's slow exhale, a small, soft sound, almost at the edge of hearing. The hum continues. It always continues. At the farthest end of the loft, near the great wheel, Sarah pauses and sits on a low cedar step, one of a set of 3 that were built here for this purpose, for the night shift spinright to rest on during the quietest portion of the watch. The wheel is nearby, turning its imperceptible arc, and from this angle, you can see a section of its curve against the furnace-lit wall, a great, smooth sweep of cedar and brass, the sheets attached to it, pale and slow in their widening circuit. Sarah leans back against the wall. She lets her hands rest in her lap. Her eyes are open, but softly, not watching anything in particular, only letting the loft be what it is around her. The warmth through the floor is very consistent here near the wheel. One of the furnace panels is directly below this section, and the heat rises with particular steadiness into the cedar planks, and from the planks into everything resting on them. You sit on the step beside her. The mill rocks very gently. The thermal current below shifts its center by a fraction. Perhaps one of the larger columns has completed its rise, and the next has taken its place slightly to the east, and the mill responds in its familiar way, a slow, gradual lean toward one side, then a slow, gradual settling back, like a breath, like a sigh, like something enormous and patient, completing one motion and beginning the next. The hum adjusts by almost nothing, and then returns. The sheets rock on their rods, just barely, just the slightest forward lean, all 300 of them together, and then settling back. A sound so small, it is less sound than suggestion, a collective whispered breath. You are very warm. Your body is very settled. The amber light is steady and soft, coming up from below, catching the pale surfaces of the sheets, making the brass housings glow along the walls, finding the old cedar of the floor and the frame structures and the great wheel, and making them all one warm, continuous thing. Not separate objects, but a single, slow-moving warmth, a single ongoing amber presence that contains the mill and everything in it, and you, here, at the center of this quiet evening. The draw fans hum and hum. The great wheel turns. The sheets breathe in the slow air, and you are here, simply here. After some unmeasured time, it could be minutes, it could be longer. Time in the mill is always a loose and generous thing. Sarah closes her eyes, not to sleep. The night shift spinrite does not sleep during her watch, but to rest in this particular way that is different from sleep. A settled, receptive stillness in which the mill's various sounds arrive not as things requiring attention, but simply as what the world sounds like at this altitude, at this hour, when everything is as it should be. The hum arrives in her stillness and passes through it without catching. The slow creak of the wheel arrives and settles into the general warmth. The barely there papery whisper of the sheets arrives and is absorbed. You close your eyes too, and in the darkness behind your eyes, the amber warmth is still there, not seen but felt as a quality of the darkness itself, a warmth in the air on your face and in the cedar beneath you and all around you in a circulating breath of the draw fans. The smell of cedar is very present. The smell of reed ash is present, lower. The faint trace of dried blossom, memory of Syrah's tea, ghost of it still present in the warm air of the mill's slow circulation, is barely there. But it is there, sweet and dry and faint, arriving in the same breath as the cedar, as the mineral warmth, as the high altitude trace of distant salt, all of them together, all of them familiar now, all of them home. The mill sways, very slowly, very gently. You sway with it. Your breathing has matched the mill's breathing, long and slow and without hurry, in and out with the draw fan's rhythm, one long breath at a time, each one complete before the next begins. You are not thinking about your breathing. You're not managing it. It is simply happening, as it always has, as it will, long and slow and patient. The great wheel makes its sound. One more arc. The long, low creak of it, that deeply settled, ancient wood sound, the sound of something following its own true course through time, unhurried by anything, unchanged by anything, simply turning, simply completing each arc and arriving at the next. The sheets hang in the amber light. They are further along in their drying now, closer by imperceptible degrees to what they will be when the morning shift comes up and takes them down from their rods and stacks them carefully and carries them to the lower level for whatever comes next, closer to the page, closer to the thing that will hold a mark, carry a word, outlast tonight. But that is tomorrow. That is for others. Tonight, they hang in the amber warmth and continue their slow becoming, and no one asks anything of them. Sarah breathes beside you. The mill breathes around you both, somewhere far below, far, far below, too far to see, too far to hear, only just barely far enough to feel in the quality of the air. The inland sea turns in its long, tidal patience. The water moves in its particular way, without urgency, without destination. Only the deep turning of something enormous that has been turning for a very long time and will continue. The thermals rise from its surface, warm water meeting cooler air, the constant exchange, the slow evaporation of moisture into atmosphere, the slow ascent, column after column, hour after hour, carrying the mill on their patient shoulders, rocking it, holding it, breathing it upward. You are held by all of this. You do not need to hold anything in return. The amber light is softer now. Or perhaps it only seems softer because you are softer. because the edges of things have gently blurred. Not the edges of the sheets, not the edges of the cedar planks or the brass housings, but your own edges. The particular definition of yourself that you maintain all day, and that costs something, that requires a small, constant effort. The effort of being located, being bounded, being one thing and not another. That effort is no longer required. The mill does not ask for it. The night does not ask for it. The hum continues. It is very low now, or rather, it is the same as it always was, only you have descended further into it, until it is no longer a sound you are hearing from outside, but a sound you are sitting within, a resonance that your body is part of, that vibrates in your chest at the same frequency, that breathes in your lungs at the same long interval. The draw fans and you, the same breath. The warmth through the cedar floor moves through you in the same long way, slowly, thoroughly, without hurry. You are warm. You have been warm since the threshold, since the amber gallery, since the first cedar plank under your feet, and the warmth has been accumulating all evening, deepening in layers like the smell of the mill's air, cedar and reed ash and mineral water and dried blossom, each one its own warmth, each one present, all of them now simply the single warm thing that surrounds you. The great drying wheel turns. One more degree. The papery whisper of the sheets comes to you as something very faint now, very far away in its softness, not distant, because you are still in the same loft, still on the same cedar step, still in the same amber glow, but far in the sense that it has crossed some threshold of faintness, below which sound becomes something other than sound, becomes simple presence, becomes the quality the air has of being inhabited by something very quiet. You are that quiet now, or almost. There is still some small part of the day's mind that stirs occasionally, a thought that surfaces, not fully formed, just the shape of one, and then sinks again, and the surface closes over it, smooth and even, the way still water closes over a stone. It sinks. The amber light receives it. The hum receives it. The warmth receives it. And there is simply this: the mill, the cedar, the amber warmth on pale sheets, the great wheel making its one sound in its own time. Sarah, still and settled at your side, the thermal columns far below, rising in their silver patience from the surface of the dark sea. The salt trace in the high altitude air, very faint, very clean, arriving on each long, slow breath. The draw fans, the hum, the hum. You are very far down now. The thoughts are very slow. The amber light is a warmth only, not seen, felt. Cedar underfoot, warm, warm. The hum continues, low and long, the single breath of the mill, the single low note of everything turning and tending and moving in its patient circle. You breathe with it. In, the cedar, the reed ash, the faint mineral sweetness, the trace of salt. Out, slowly. The sheets hang in the amber. They breathe too. Everything breathes. The thermal columns rise. The mill sways, once, very gently. You sway with it, without effort. You are not holding anything. There's nothing to hold. The great wheel turns. That low sound, that long, settling sound. One more arc. The brass is warm. The cedar is warm. The clay cup on the iron stand. The tea long gone. The clay still holding warmth. Warm. Everything warm. Everything patient. Everything here. The draw fans hum. The sheets are still. Almost. One moves. The very faintest lean forward. A single white sheet near the wheel, catching the draw fan's long exhale, and settles back, and is still again. The thermal rises. The mill is held. You are held. The hum, the warmth, the amber. Slow, slow, still. The mill tends itself now. The wheel turns. Sarah is a stillness beside a stillness. The air moves. The hum is the air moving. The hum is the warmth moving. The hum is the sea rising. You are already there. You are already in it. The cedar, the warmth, the slow, the wheel, the hum,